I'm Joseph Wakely Lynch, editor of LMU Magazine. Today I'm talking with Patrick Furlong, interim director of the Loyola Marymount University Center for Service and Action, which organizes alternative spring trips, community-based learning opportunities, the LMU Food Pantry, special games, and the university's 10 service orgs. We're here to talk with Patrick about service to others during the COVID-19 pandemic and society's social distancing. Patrick, we're in an era of social distancing. We've all been told to stay home, which means that LMU students the campus has been closed. LMU students are now learning through online instruction from their homes and elsewhere. In terms of service work that's taking place through the Center for Service and Action, is there service going on in the Los Angeles community from LMU students?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're right, we got the stay-at-home order and it kind of applied across the board at LMU. And I think, one thing our students have reflected on is even just that privilege and that opportunity to do stay at home, right? We recognize not everybody has that opportunity. And so we've kind of first and foremost talked with our students of, if you have that opportunity to do that, that actually is the way we do kinship and solidarity right now. But we also recognize that there's still work that needs to be done, right? If all the work that we were working on prior to address various challenges and injustices in LA were big prior to COVID-19, one might argue they're even more huge right now. So What we've found is a few things. I mean, first and foremost, I know we're all in different situations, but almost every organization we work with needs financial support now more than ever. And a lot of these organizations are out there, so I think food pantries that a lot of our students work with, that a lot of our alums might be familiar with, are very much still out there giving food. So the LA Food Bank, St. Margaret Center, Blessed Sacrament Church over in Hollywood, all these groups are still distributing food. I mean, Homeboy Industries had a drive-through food pantry for their folks last week. And so those organizations are out there, but we're really encouraging our students to find virtual opportunities. And so we've created a resource page on the Center for Service and Action that has various virtual service and advocacy opportunities for students to get engaged in. And what I think is great about it is when our students go home, they're going home all across the world, right? It's not just to the LA region. And so we found a variety of opportunities that students can take advantage of no matter what time zone they're in, no matter what they're at. And it's just a great opportunity for folks to still give back, because I think in our office, that's what we've heard the most is people still want to give back. In fact, more than ever because of this crisis, they want to lean into community.
So you've had students who contact you saying, I don't want to stop. I don't want to give this up, even temporarily. How can I continue? Is that the case?
Yep. So we've had students saying, like, what can I do right now? What do you know? I think it's also been great. We've had students reaching out saying, hey, I found this opportunity. It might be something worth sharing with other folks. We've had our faculty members who run community-based learning courses, trying to obviously be as responsive as possible to students in this difficult time and modify the syllabus, but still honor that desire that students have to give back. So, I think the last couple of weeks were a scramble to settle into the new normal. And I think what we're seeing now is people want to find ways to engage however they can. And so we're seeing an increase of interest and activity to try and get engaged with these different nonprofits, albeit in a virtual setting.
So what are some of the ways that students can actually do things because at first glance, I would say to myself, well, they're limited to giving financial contributions, as you said. What kind of things are they able to do in this environment?
Yeah, so I would kind of take it at there's what we have as the local level, and then there's kind of a more broad national service opportunity. So in terms of our local partners, these partners that LMU students engage with on a regular basis here, those partners are very much kind of figuring it out on the fly like we all are. And so we've kind of slowly started to get this trickle of opportunities where maybe they have a tutoring opportunity for a student. Maybe they have a need to help with a research paper. Maybe they have a need to help with other areas where they're trying to figure out how can we really leverage the talents and passions of LMU students. And what we're doing is we're putting those up in what's called Leo. So it's kind of like the best way to describe it for our alums is almost like an internal Facebook for LMU students. And we have a service portion of that called Give Pulse that really drives to connect students directly to nonprofits. So we're seeing those opportunities, but then there's also these big national opportunities. So one I like to point out all the time is Crisis Text Line. And Crisis Text Line was formed a number of years ago to basically be like a crisis hotline, but with that obvious realization of the majority of young people nowadays are not calling any hotlines, right? Texting is our main mode of communication. And so crisis text line, you can actually go through a pretty rigorous training, but a good training, and you can become a crisis text line responder. And so you can be someone on the other end helping as folks are texting in with a whole variety of crises across the country to support them. And so we're seeing some interest there. And then there's translation services. More than ever with COVID-19, we've seen all these communications going out, and some different organizations that are sending communications need to do those in multiple languages, but maybe don't have the staff. And so there's even a kind of translations across borders where students who have those language skills can really be helping to translate vital documents to help our entire community right now in this crisis.
I'm wondering, is there any particular example of something you know of, whether it's a Center for Service and Action or somewhere else, or originating elsewhere on campus, where there's been some unusually moving outreach, either from the organization or people in organizations, or from students to the organizations?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot. And I think what's been cool is to get those responses from partners, but one really moved me recently. So before I worked in the Center for Service and Action, I actually spent a number of years working in campus ministry. And when I was there, I had the real blessing to run our De Colores program, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, but it's a weekend service and immersion program down to Tijuana, Mexico. And so you go to the same community down there, this little community in El Florido, which is a portion of Tijuana. And what I think is really beautiful in general is there's kind of a relationship forming opportunity there, because it's not so far away where students don't get to return and kind of build relationships. And so Julianne and Chris North are two LMU alums who founded this program back in the late 80s, and they run the nonprofit that does home building, education, other things for this community there. And so Julianne was down in the community a few weeks ago and just getting ready for what we all knew, kind of, okay, coming in, we don't know what it's going to look like. And she was working with the community and the nonprofit to make sure they were prepared. And folks were asking her questions about how it is in the US. And she kind of offhand said, oh, yeah, for some reason, toilet paper is a big thing. And everyone's going for toilet paper. And didn't think anything of it, and went back to San Diego that evening. And a few days later, went back down to Tijuana. And she gets there, and the community members were like, hey, you talked about toilet paper, and that's not a problem here in Tijuana. So we actually organized a toilet paper drive, and they take her to a room, and there's hundreds upon hundreds of rolls of toilet paper. And they said, can you get this to our friends in the United States who need it? And I just think, it's humorous, because why is there toilet paper in Tijuana and not in San Diego? And we'll have an economist someday do that analysis on this podcast. But I think it's a really moving thing of, in times like this, even when we're told to socially distance, what we're finding is, despite social distance, we crave community and relationship more than ever. And this notion of mutuality, right? That each of us benefit from this relationship is true in that moment, where folks in San Diego were getting a shipment from Tijuana to really kind of help them through something they were struggling with. And I just think that's a really beautiful thing to cling on to in the midst of this pandemic.
Let me ask you one other, I think I have two more questions. Let me ask you one about some of the organizations. And just briefly, I'm wondering, how does an organization like St. Margaret's Center, which I have visited, continues to work in an era of social distancing? Because that facility has several hundred people coming through. It probably has 40 people working there in various capacities during the day, and probably several hundred coming through to benefit from the services. How are they managing it in this time when we're trying to make sure everybody is 6 feet away from everybody else?
Yeah, I think it's almost nearly impossible, right? I think, I listened to the most recent podcast interview you all did with the alum who was a doctor in the Bronx. And I was struck by it and just thinking I was amazed by it, and it was really moving and difficult and so many emotions to listen to it. And I kept thinking, man, I'm so grateful for courageous people like this in the medical profession. But I think that gratitude also extends to our folks in the nonprofits who are still showing up and finding ways to serve the most needy and the most vulnerable in our community, for the delivery workers, for the grocery folks, for the people picking vegetables and fruits on the farm. We know that a lot of people don't have that privilege of social distancing. And so I think, what I'm hearing from our partners in general is they are practicing every safety protocol possible. They're working on kind of limiting the number of folks that are doing things, but still getting that stuff out there. But I think we have to acknowledge, they're doing it really courageously, and they're doing it under great difficulty. And so I think that's why one thing we've been pushing is that idea of, look, if you have any financial opportunities to support groups like this, they need it more than ever, because they're not stopping that service. Homelessness hasn't disappeared in Los Angeles because of this crisis. We know that it has the potential to be even more profoundly impacted by it. So it's a really imperfect dance of trying to meet the needs of folks. And I think they're also some heroes that maybe we're not talking as much about, but that deserve to be uplifted and held in gratitude by our community.
Yeah, that was my last question. How can people help? Is it mainly by helping through financial contributions? Would it help for folks who know about organizations who need help try to contact you and say, I know more organizations that also need help? Would that be useful to you?
Yeah, I mean, one thing we've been advising folks is, if there's nonprofits that serve the most vulnerable in our community that you supported prior to this pandemic, they 9 times out of 10 are still going to need that, right? So those groups like St. Margaret Center, like Homeboy, are still trying to do services to support their clients. Catholic schools that are in kind of more low income areas are still doing school and still finding those ways to meet the needs of students. I think even LMU, we had an emergency fund for our students, and there was an appeal put out there, and we've seen the way students have had various needs, from support getting home to, man, I used to use the computers in the library, and now I need to find a way to get reliable technology. So I would say, like, first and foremost, if there's an organization you love and you support and you trust, they're going to need your help. If you don't know organizations like that or you want to know more, contact me. You can easily find my information online. It's just patrick.furlong@lmu.edu. I'm happy to work with you on it. And I think those financial resources are one thing. We're happy to kind of provide some of those virtual opportunities that we've got posted on our CSA website. And I think it's really cheesy, but I also think, I heard this quote the other day of, hope is this active conviction that despair won't have the last word. And I think all of us right now kind of need to be champions of hope. And I think that's opposite of optimism. I don't think it's like, oh, everything's just going to be okay. I think it's an active conviction of, I'm going to lean into community at a time when that's needed more than ever. And I'm going to do that in terms of how I interact and say hello to my neighbors, even if from a social distance. I'm going to do it on social media. I'm going to do it with my financial donations. I just think now more than ever is a time for us to really kind of rally around hope and being hope-filled people.
Yeah. Would you give us the CSA website URL again?
Yeah, it's lmu.edu/CSA, and we have made it big and prominent virtual opportunities. And we're going to be continuing to update it week by week as more information becomes available for us.
Well, Patrick, it's heartening to know that even at a time when things can be bleak and we're not next to each other physically, it doesn't have to stop the work of service to others. So thank you for your time, and best wishes to you and the work and the center and the students.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, it's been great. I think we're all journeying with grief and we're all journeying with challenge, and it's distinct and unique for each person. And yet what a weird and beautiful thing that we all share that in common. So I appreciate the work you all are doing.